This is the third day of our seminar, and people are still drifting in, so we can waste a little time. It felt to me yesterday like we were coming to a focus on a fairly deep level of this exploration, the exploration that is being identified as the integral paradigm of knowledge. And what kind of focus that would really entail to truly integrate our faculties of consciousness, which we have learned are intermediary between the absolute transcendent self and the individual senses and mind. Is that how you've understood it? And on that plane of universals, the faculties are among a few, among many, divine principles. And above them are the planes of consciousness that Sri Aurobindo has identified as revelation and inspiration and intuition. The faculties of mind that are closest to supermind. In order to integrate all of these planes, a kind of energy is needed which is not our normal energy of the structures of the vital and the physical and the mental that we are very familiar with and that we inhabit easily. In order to really integrate all of these planes, another kind of consciousness is needed. And the process between here and there is thought of as being evolutionary, but it's also thought of as being yogic. So the elevation of our already evolved levels of consciousness is necessary first, the elevation, and we've been speaking a lot about that process, and it's an emergent process from the rational mind to the integral consciousness. And along the way we connect with the higher mental and overmental and supramental energies, which then come down and gradually transform these structures that we inhabit into those structures yet to emerge. Yesterday we had a nice summary of the evolutionary principles, the involution and evolution, which makes this whole idea of the integral paradigm much more dynamic. It isn't just an epistemology, it's an epistemological entry into a more integral consciousness of that which is, the ontology, the being of things. If we can enter into a direct relationship with the being of things through higher levels of consciousness, then we become channels for this evolutionary force that's descending. So that's why it's important to think along these lines. But just thinking along these lines is not really the point. Does that make sense? So, this morning we are going to have speakers, guest speakers, who haven't necessarily been an integral part of the research of the University of Human Unity, but who have been connected with it and are becoming more and more familiar with this project, and will be speaking to us from their particular perspectives as professionals who are engaged in the evolution of consciousness in their domains. And I'm not going to presume to be able to introduce them in terms of who they are and what their domains are. So I would invite the speakers who are coming up this morning, Natalia and Tong and Ananta and Matthew, to introduce themselves briefly in the context of their presentations, so we will know them integrally. And in the middle of the morning, we will have a musical interlude provided by Arnab from the ashram. And then in the evening, we will have a concert by Ladislav, which will be in Savitri Bhavan. At the end of the day, Matthew will begin the process of summarizing for us, and then we'll all have an opportunity to see where we are headed. Or maybe we will have an opportunity to see where we are headed. What I would like to do now is introduce a yogic segment. Because if we are actually going to move from the rational to the integral and the higher intuition, we're going to need to do what the mother suggested. Tom read the other day this idea of the mother that we need to be this vast inner being that we are, outside of our personalities and heredity and cultural conditioning and all of that. And if we're actually going to do that, then it's a process of disengaging from those structures that determine us so persistently. If we are going to evolve in a way that's not dependent upon kinship relations, for example, everyone who's studied evolution a little bit knows that kinship relations are extremely important. We play roles as mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and cousins. We play roles of all kinds in society that have been endowed with a kind of, the superego idea, all the things that we have to do in order to be legitimate members of society. These structures are going to have to literally be broken down if we're going to evolve beyond them. And that breaking down process is yoga. And in Sri Aurobindo's teaching, he speaks of the two liberations. In the Synthesis of Yoga, he speaks at length about this idea, and then he embodies it himself. And Sri Aurobindo and the Mother are the paradigm cases of this breakthrough from those structures to new structures through social, artistic, poetic, philosophic seeing, being. So this idea of the two liberations means first the liberation of the self from all of those conditioning structures. And that's what yoga is usually about. The Yoga Sutras teach detachment, silence of the mind, silence of the vital, purification of the being, liberation of the Purusha from Prakriti. The next liberation that he speaks about is the transformation by the divine Shakti entering into that empty vehicle, receptacle, to make of these evolutionary structures something else. That liberates the being to new possibilities. The first liberation liberates the being from the restrictions of the already evolved structures. So in Savitri, there is a canto, there are several actually, in which Sri Aurobindo places these two movements in juxtaposition to each other. The absolute rejection and surrender on the one hand, that's the negative movement of yoga, and the absolute reception and illumination by the divine Shakti across the page. These two are necessary movements. The surrender and the reception of the new consciousness, the new force of consciousness, who in this teaching is personified as Savitri. So there's a canto in which the first part, the first section, is particularly clearly exemplary of these two movements, these two liberations. By the way, in my work with Savitri, I have decided, I've discovered, I've realized that the sections of the cantos are particularly powerful and complete in themselves. The sections of the cantos are the mantras. In some cantos, there are several sections that are parallel statements of the same thing, and in some cantos, the sections are not particularly related to each other in definite ways. And in some cantos, they are more linear in their relationship to each other, but still, each section stands as a complete statement. When I read a section, I am reading a teaching, a transmission. And it doesn't require the context of the whole for it to be what it is. So this is the first section of the canto called The Adoration of the Divine Mother. And in this canto there are three sections, and each of them is quite distinct from the other. But I think that this one conveys the idea of the two liberations. A stillness absolute, incommunicable, meets the sheer self-discovery of the soul. A wall of stillness shuts it from the world. A gulf of stillness swallows up the sense and makes unreal all that mind has known, all that the laboring senses still would weave, prolonging an imaged unreality. Self's vast spiritual silence occupies space. Only the inconceivable is left. Only the nameless, without space and time. Abolished is the burdening need of life. Thought falls from us. We cease from joy and grief. The ego is dead. We are freed from being and care. We have done with birth and death and work and fate. O soul, it is too early to rejoice. Thou hast reached the boundless silence of the self. Thou hast leaped into a glad, divine abyss. But where hast thou thrown self's mission and self's power? On what dead bank on the Eternal's road? One was within thee who was self and world. What hast thou done for his purpose in the stars? Escape brings not the victory and the crown. Something thou camest to do from the unknown. But nothing is finished, and the world goes on, because only half God's work is done. Only the everlasting No has neared and stared into thy eyes and killed thy heart. But where is the lover's everlasting yes? And immortality in the secret heart? The voice that chants to the Creator fire. The symboled Om, the great assenting word. The bridge between the rapture and the calm. The passion and the beauty of the bride. The chamber where the glorious enemies kiss. The smile that saves. The golden peak of things. This too is truth. At the mystic fount of life. A black veil has been lifted. We have seen the mighty shadow of the omniscient Lord. But who has lifted up the veil of light? And who has seen the body of the King? The mystery of God's birth and acts remains, leaving unbroken the last chapter's seal. Unsolved, the riddle of the unfinished play. The cosmic player laughs within his mask. And still the last inviolate secret hides behind the human glory of a form, behind the gold eidolon of a name. A large white line has figured as a goal. But far beyond, the ineffable sun tracks blaze. What seemed the source and end was a wide gate. A last bare step into eternity. An eye has opened upon timelessness. Infinity takes back the forms it gave, and through God's darkness, or his naked light. His million rays return into the sun. There is a zero sign of the Supreme. Nature, left nude and still, uncovers God. But in her grandiose nothingness, all is there. When her strong garbs are torn away from us, the soul's ignorance is slain, but not the soul. The zero covers an immortal face. A high and blank negation is not all. A huge extinction is not God's last word. Life's ultimate sense. The close of being's course. The meaning of this great mysterious world. In absolute silence sleeps an absolute power. Awaking, it can wake the trance-bound soul. And in the ray, reveal the parent sun. It can make the world a vessel of Spirit's force. It can fashion in the clay God's perfect shape. To free the self is but one radiant pace. Here to fulfill himself was God's desire.